Well, we're still on the subject of everything that was created was already there the moment that we find evidence in the fossil record of anything of life forms created. All examples of all things are there. Stephen J. Gould, Harvard University Natural History magazine. We're at BibleStudyManuals.net, K81.htm. We're looking for, instead of this gradual progressive continuum that evolutionists maintain that would not leave distinctive kinds, you have represented by the fossil record separate distinct kinds in the beginning, just like we see in the world today. So there's not a gradual progressive continuum that would not leave distinctive kinds. You just see this, everything in the world today, sudden and complex kinds right from the start. But then we look at the chart that's used to represent the fossil record in our biology textbooks. The chart tells us that we began at the bottom with a single cell organism and gradually progressed upward, becoming more and more complex as we go through time. But where did a representation like that come from? It doesn't come from the fossil record. In fact, many evolutionists would acknowledge that. Notice, for example, a statement by Stephen Gould, Harvard University, from Natural History, Volume 86, page 13. He says, "These evolutionary trees that adorn our textbooks have data only at the tips and nodes of their branches." Interesting. The rest is inference, however reasonable, not the evidence of the fossils. So there is no evidence. The fossils don't support that. They actually support creationism. The Cambrian rock strata, where life forms apparently were an explosion of existence, all the representatives of the vertebrates and invertebrates are there, albeit many smaller. The much larger ones are not any different, but larger. Now, the point that we make here is not how you infer, but is the inference even seen as evidence from the fossil record? No. Dr. Gould said, no, the evidence is not there. So what evidence do you have? It's what you believe should be there, or you believe what happened, but you don't have evidence. So, but where do we get these trees that are in the Cambrian rock strata? Compare another quotation from Dr. Patton's notes. "You see, I should at least show a photo of the fossil from which each type of organism was derived. I will lay it on the line. There is not one such fossil for which one could make a watertight argument. It is easy enough to make up stories of how one form gave rise to another, but such stories are not part of science, for there is no way of putting them to the test. I don't think we shall ever have any access to any form of tree which we can call factual, evolutionary tree. We don't know what derived or evolved into the next, based on evidence, only fiction." Colin Patterson, Senior Paleontologist, British Museum of Natural History in Harbours. "We want to continue that consideration of the fossil record, looking at these attempts to link up the various fossils to show this progressive continuum, this gradual progression that would indicate evolution, which they should be able to do if evolution is actually reflected in the fossil record, which it is not. Now we can begin that by looking at a statement by Stephen Gould of Harvard, writing in a recent article in Natural History. He says, "I will regard the failure to find a clear vector of progress in life's history as the most puzzling fact of the fossil record. We have sought to impose a pattern that we hope to find in a world that does not really display it." Gould is stating there that there is a failure in the attempt by evolutionists to impose a pattern, a viable, believable pattern, the pattern of evolution, on the facts of the fossil record that does not display that conclusion. He says it doesn't display it, but we can infer it came from there. Well, how do you do that? It's nothing in that direction. In creation, yes. Sudden explosion of life, yes. Darwin recognized that this was a problem and said that very plainly in the book of Origin of the Species he said regarding intermediate links, which of course are a requisite of his position. Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain, and this perhaps is the greatest objection which can be urged against my theory. Dr. Patton goes on to say, innumerable transitional forms must have existed, but why do we not find them embedded in countless numbers in the crusts of the earth? Why is not every geological formation and every stratum full of such intermediate links? We find zero, not a few, zero. Stephen Gould. The presumptuous and contrived linking up of fossils in order to force the model of evolution, Gould says, is objectionable and not at all valid. And he is one of the world's leading evolutionists. Compare a quotation from David Raup of the University of Chicago. He's a curator of the Field Museum of Natural History there, one of the leading authorities in the world. He says, referring to Darwin, that the evidence we find in the geologic record is not nearly as compatible with Darwinian natural selection as we would like it to be. That's a belief statement. You'd like it to be. It is what it is. Irwin was completely aware of this. He was embarrassed by the fossil record because it didn't look the way he, Darwin, predicted it would. We are now about 120 years, at that time, and this is even more, after Darwin, and the knowledge of the fossil record has been greatly expanded. We now have 250,000 fossil species, but the situation relative to finding compatibility with Darwin's theory hasn't changed much. Ironically, we have even fewer examples of evolutionary transition than we had in Darwin's time, because we more thoroughly investigated them. By this I mean that some of the classic cases of Darwinian change in the fossil record, such as the evolution of the horse in North America, have had to be discarded or modified as a result of more detailed information. People with an objective mind investigated and found this is not viable. David Raup, University of Chicago, curator, Field Museum, Chicago, in Natural History. Dr. Patton said, he, Darwin, prophesied that future generations of paleontologists would fill in these gaps by diligent search. 120 years of paleontological research later, it has become abundantly clear that the fossil record will not confirm this part of Darwin's predictions. Nor is the problem a miserably poor record. The fossil record simply shows that this prediction was wrong. It's not poor in the sense of supporting what you believe, but what is actually there, it's 100% accurate. Colin Patterson, Senior Paleontologist, British Museum of Natural History. Men like Raup understand that as more information becomes available, that falsified information should be discarded. And it is to their chagrin that false information is still in the textbooks. As we get more information, we end up with fewer and fewer examples, as more and more examples have been debunked, like the horse. Consider another quotation from Dr. Patton's notes. There have been an awful lot of stories, some more imaginative than others, about what the nature of that history of life really is. The more famous example, still on exhibit downstairs in the museum in Chicago, is the exhibit on horse evolution prepared perhaps 50 years ago. That has been presented as the literal truth in textbook after textbook. Now, I think that is lamentable, particularly when the people who profess those kinds of stories may themselves be aware of the speculative nature of some of that stuff. Colin Patterson, Senior Paleontologist, British Museum, Natural History. Consider a similar statement by Professor Derek Ager. He, at the time this statement was made, was president of the British Paleontological Association and one of the more prolific writers in stratigraphy in Europe. He says, it must be significant that nearly all the evolutionary stories I have learned as a student have now been debunked. Similarly, my own experience of more than 20 years looking for evolutionary lineages among the Mesozoic brachiopoda have proved them equally elusive. All right, now, Professor Patton, Dr. Patton says, here are seashells. There are billions of them in the fossil record, perhaps more of them than anything else. An excellent opportunity to show evolution if it's there. He's been working at it for 20 years. That's his specialty. And he says that finding evidence in his specialty which proved out evolution was equally elusive. You do not have this evolutionary story that can be presented from the facts of the record. The points maintained by evolutionists have been debunked one by one. Perhaps the one point that evolutionists do make that is used most often, that is certainly in all of the textbooks that talk about evolution, biology textbooks and earth science and geology combined, is that of the Archaeopteryx. Yes. We are told by some that this is the perfect missing link. It links up the reptiles with the birds. The perfect intermediate, half bird, half reptile. It's an amazing fossil that was found in Bavaria in the Sollenhofen limestone, a very fine grain of limestone that preserves the fossil in amazing detail. We see very clear indications of feathers and feet that look like birds. And we look at the wings and we see beautiful feathers. This is a singular fossil, an asymmetric feather that was found in the limestone. And we see, as a result of the asymmetric feather, an asymmetric wing. That is, that one side of it is broader than the other. And that would indicate that this asymmetric wing was used for powered flying. It's an airfoil. Birds that don't fly have symmetrical wings. Notice also that there are claws on the wings. That's pointed out to be proof that this was a reptile bird, not just a bird. Exciting. But what they often fail to acknowledge is that many birds today, modern birds, have claws on their wings. For example, the beautiful flying bird, Hoatzin, down in South America, together with the ostrich and the cassowary, a number of the non-flying birds, especially have claws, especially in the juvenile form. One of the things that we learned about the Archaeopteryx in the last year was that all of these forms, all of the 6 specimens of them, were juvenile forms. They weren't mature, which misled many of the researchers in a number of ways. We're also pointed by evolutionists to the teeth. And their bird teeth are supposed to prove that this makes him kin to the reptile and no longer a good bird. However, we look especially at the fossil record, and we see great birds, beautiful birds. Some of them are almost exactly like our modern tern, a great powered flyer with ferocious-looking teeth. Furthermore, we examine the teeth. We find that these are not reptile teeth, not teeth like the theropod dinosaur, which is supposed to lead to. It's supposed to lead to that. That's the intermediate species. But no, these are teeth like other birds have. They're not serrated on the edges like the reptiles. The teeth have a constriction as they protrude from the surface of the mouth. And they are expanded roots. They have expanded roots like birds do. These are not like reptile teeth. And so these fossils are bird fossils through and through. And each of these features of the Archaeopteryx prove the opposite of the evolutionist claim that it is a reptile and therefore not a bird. The feathers are perfect feathers for a bird. The claws are like bird claws. The teeth are like bird teeth. And the wishbone, which is a requisite of a powered flyer, is a perfectly good wishbone, very strong, in fact larger than most. The sternum, which was supposed to be an indication that it couldn't fly, this small breastbone to which flight muscles are attached, was small in the Archaeopteryx. And when we find that the juvenile forms do not have ossified sternums, that they become bone-like as they mature, then that's exactly what we would expect in an immature bird. The brain, we're told by evolutionists, was very lizard-like. But as they extracted the fossil from the matrix, they found that they'd misinterpreted the midline, and thus misinterpreted the size of the brain. It's a bird brain. It's a little bigger. So now then, he has a bird brain after all. He has bird legs, a jaw like that articulates just like birds and not like the reptiles.